Hi. So I wanted to talk a little bit about suffering and surrender and why surrender is so important in our journey towards selflessness or God realization or self realization or just being more more aligned with the truth of ourselves, which in turn uh, gives us more and more peace of mind, peace in our hearts, where we become more of ourselves and not less of ourselves. So, given that segue, the less of ourselves is usually where the suffering resides. So, the idea that I exist and that I am a part of or apart from the world, or I'm separate from the world, gives me a sense of individuality. It gives me a sense of me and something else where I can experience the world through a lens of an idea that of the idea that there's me and something else that I'm apart from, separate from. And this gives rise to objectification, object orientation. So there's me and this thing that's not me. When we live in a world, which we're taught, so nobody's at fault here, when we live in a world where we continually look at everything like other or not me or not myself, we perpetuate the idea inside of ourselves that I exist apart from. Now, if we maybe are a Christian, we might say that we aren't apart from God. We are one with God, and it's through Jesus Christ that we are or become one with the Father. This, though, still gives rise to the idea that there's me, there's Jesus who's not me, there's Jesus and Father, which biblically we could dissect that a little bit more. I won't do too much of that, but Jesus being and letting us know that he is one with the Father. So we could say God and Jesus are one. Yet there's us who are separate from God or Jesus. So, how do we start to become one with that which we see? Well, Jesus also points to that. When two become one, I am. Now, that can allude to a lot of things, like when both of our eyes become one or unified. I am becomes, now that can be translated like our left eye and our right eye, our left eye feminine, our right eye masculine. When they become one, they are instead of looking at it linearly, like here and here, we could look at it almost multidimensionally, where that actually merges with itself. So the idea of this pendulation from one extreme, when both are met simultaneously, it collapses the wave and becomes a singularity. So this singularity of left and right, which no longer is left nor right, but now something else. This self and not self is who we are in singularity. So a lot of polarity or non-duality teachings come to this place where we see that we either see often through an I, and it's this continual objectification where I exist separate from or apart from that which I see, that creates form identity, me and you. The more fields that we can merge, the less you there is, and the more I become. Also, the less suffering. Another way to look at this is when our will, which we're given, that is it is a mirror image of God's will. Excuse me. Yet, when we believe ourselves to be separate from God, we move back into polarity or duality thinking. So I'm apart from, God's separate from. There's a power here and there's a power here. When we believe ourselves to be separate from the source, we are operating within our individuality. That individuality has a spark of or a piece of the whole within it, but it doesn't know itself as the whole in which it came from. So we operate then, our will operates apart from God's will. And yet we're given God's will. What we've done with God's will is we've followed a belief system that most of us don't recognize, which keeps us stuck in time instead of infinity. Again, another duality, another polarity, the finite and the infinite, the non-finite. The kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of man. When two become one, I am all of that. So the gift of our individuality really is a gift. It allows us to experience ourselves apart from the whole of ourselves, which is all. We get to, in a way, pretend that we have a form and we have a name, and this name is separate from you, that has a form and has a name. And then when we're in separation, because again, objectification, we can commoditize the things that are different, not the same. And instead of looking at form as function, we see the function as something we can get or add to us versus something that we all already have when we're in wholeness. So we think that we need the thing because we think that thing or having that thing will add something to us. It'll make us happier, more wealthy, something that will add to us, something that we think that we need or that we want, because from lack, we don't have. So this individual will that we're given is precious because we have the opportunity to experience so much of life. And yet, it also is the source of our suffering. Because along with this individual will, this individuality, and the power that comes along with it, is the power of the I, or the pride that comes with being an individual, the I that thinks apart from or separate from God or all or totality, or the I that thinks it knows better than or more than the unknown. So this thought or thinking mind, or this one that thinks, this thinker becomes the source of our suffering. The more that we identify with the one who thinks it's apart from, thinks it's separate from, thinks that it believes and it thinks almost like a separate entity apart from the whole. I am a collection of thoughts, beliefs that create the idea that I was born and that I will die, and that this form matters more than any other form because it is apart from, and thus the value or evaluation that's given. Things can be added to or taken away from. Me, with my will, I'm given the power to think and choose to think apart from God. When I think apart from God, I build what we might call the ego or ego identity. Now, again, there's nothing wrong with ego. We're given this. This is a gift to utilize to experience life. It, though, becomes a source of our suffering when we don't surrender that and merge back into the other source of the its polarity, its duality. When I, as the singular I, can't become one with the other I, when there's two that can't become one, I suffer. Now, this might not be apparent in a short period of time, but because our consciousness is eternal, our spirit is eternal, in the merging or in the unification, in the oneness with all that is all, that we are also from eternity bringing it back into form through the lens of eternity, or through the lens of unification or oneness. All has purpose, not more than, not less than. All has equal value, not more than, not less than. There's a function, but that function is equally valued between forms. There's no greater than, there's no less than. The hierarchy doesn't exist in the realm of unification. It exists in the realm of form and duality, but not from God vision, not from the sense of unification. But hierarchy is important. Hierarchy from the lens of duality teaches us varying degrees or nuances or subtleties within the realm or kingdoms that exist. So the denser the kingdom, the more suffering we feel. So the thoughts that we have, that we choose with our individual will, that are denser energetically, that bring our frequency to places within us that are not sublime. They don't inspire us to expansion, to more of ourselves. They reduce us to more of this form or this object or ideas that we're lacking and that we need to be able to know to know fulfillment, to be happy. When we use our thoughts and the thinker, and we identify with the thinker that thinks it knows, and it will not, the will that we're given, will not surrender or submit to anything greater than itself because it thinks it knows best, we start getting self-looping. This thinker that knows best, this king or queen of this world, in this self-centered world that's singular, not two that became one, but singular, is self-centered. This is the crux of narcissism, in the sense that there is no one outside of itself. It only sees itself from the reduced form that it believes itself to be. This thinker, as genius as it may be, with access to all the worlds of thoughts and forms, still as intelligent as it is and can connect bodies of knowledge and awareness, is not surrendered to the creative spark that inspires birth within it to something new. It cannot go beyond itself. So it is caught in a circular loop that is self-perpetuated. We see this as a microcosm in the world when we see the depth of self-centeredness in people that think that they know, where pride is seen from a lens of bolstering oneself, being proud of accomplishments and accolades and all the things that one has brought to them to add to themselves, intellect that they've garnered and studied. All of this, as beautiful as that is, if it's adding to the identity, is adding to the suffering. Because in that way, it's separating, or very covertly. It's very covert. It's so subtly you might miss it. It thinks it's enjoy because it enjoys its own thinking. But it's still separating itself from other. It cannot merge with a thought from someone else. It cannot see itself in another. It's cut off. This suffering of the self, of the singular I, we feel at the level of the solar plexus especially, where our will is singular, again, not from the two, but from the one of the individual, not submitted to a greater power that knows greater. To the degree that I have the consciousness and awareness in which I can become aware that I am aware, even still there is something outside of my awareness. That which is outside of my awareness is why submission or surrender is wise, because that which knows greater than myself is that which I submit to. I already get that when we feed fear and we see that the thinker has ruled our kingdom. That right there, that jump between surrendering ourselves to the one that knows, which is God of all gods, that which is greater than ourselves. With these small acts of submission and surrender, we build these trust and faith muscles. We build the muscles that we recognize we can do that. There's a point where we build enough of that where we get to bigger cliffs that we're looking out on, and we reach the edge of consciousness where we recognize again we're at a greater risk of losing ourselves. And yet here we are, we're at a place we don't know. Do we surrender and jump off the ledge and trust, or do we recoil and continue to stay safe, but that safety is actually safeguarding the thinker who thinks it knows, which keeps us in a reduced state, which keeps us stuck in form and self-identity, the I that thinks it knows, the I, the ego, the selfish one who is clinging. That generates suffering. That one that suffers is the one that we are looking to free ourselves from in this world, which is inverted because it as the separate one wants to stay safe by convincing you that it in its reduced state needs protection. And yet it's all of the world and the unknown that it thinks it needs protection from. Yet that which is where it came from, home. And it doesn't know that. So how could it make a decision for itself? So every time we come to that ledge, we are looking at that place between the finite and the infinite. Do we jump off the ledge? Do we surrender? Do we trust? And our trust the will of God. And each time we surrender our will to the will of God, we merge. So that singularity becomes two, which becomes one. There's so much more that I could say about this. Developing, though, our surrender to life as it is, as it's showing up, what it does is it reinforces the selfless one, the transparent one, the invisible one, who is one with all. It becomes less of itself to become more of itself. Thus, it decreases its burden and its suffering. It decreases its density and its gravity because it becomes transparent to the all of itself and the all of the world in the world as itself, which is in the world, but it's not of the world. Thank you for being with me.